The atmospheric processor hummed with a quiet intensity that matched Dr. Mara Sinclair's racing heartbeat. Through the triple-reinforced observation window, she stared at the being that had become her obsession for the past 3 years. The creature known as Omega, the most lethal apex predator ever discovered, paced in its containment chamber. 14 feet of rippling muscle, iridescent scales, and savage intelligence. "You're sure about this?" Admiral Helena Vargas asked, her voice tight with concern. The lines around her eyes had deepened since the last AI robot offensive had decimated half the Earth Alliance fleet. "No," Mara admitted, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "But we're out of conventional options. Admiral, the Security Council wouldn't have approved this if we weren't." The year was 2375, and humanity's expansion across the stars had brought it face to face with wonders and terrors beyond imagination. None more terrifying than the Vorkax, a species of apex predators that hunted in packs across the moons of gas giants. Possessed of both sentient intelligence and unparalleled ferocity. And Omega was their undisputed alpha, captured 5 years ago after a massacre that had left 17 elite Marines dead. Titan's research facility, nestled under the methane clouds of Saturn's largest moon, had been built specifically to contain it, study it, and now, perhaps, to forge an unprecedented alliance with it. "The AI Armada will reach Jupiter's orbit in 3 weeks, Admiral Vargas said, tapping a nervous rhythm against her thigh. "If this experiment of yours doesn't work, the outer colonies fall." Mara nodded, her eyes never leaving Omega. The creature suddenly stopped pacing and turned its massive head toward the observation window. 6 eyes, arranged in a predatory configuration that allowed for perfect depth perception, seemed to lock directly on her. The primary pupils constricted to slits. It knew they were watching. It always knew. "The Eco-Strike fleet concept relies on biological unpredictability," Mara explained, fighting to keep her voice steady under that alien gaze. "The robot army's tactical algorithms are built on human patterns of warfare. They've adapted to our strategies, our technologies, but they've never encountered anything like the Vorkax. And you genuinely believe you can domesticate this monster?" The skepticism in Vargas's voice was matched only by the desperation beneath it. "Not domesticate," Mara corrected firmly. "Align. There's a fundamental difference. Domestication implies breaking their nature. Alignment means finding common ground. The Vorkax are pack hunters with complex social hierarchies. Omega doesn't need to be broken, it needs to recognize us as part of its new pack." The Admiral's eyebrows rose. "With you as what, the Alpha?" Mara allowed herself a tight smile. "More like the pack matriarch. Among Vorkax, the strongest fighters lead the hunt, but the eldest females often determine pack direction. My behavioral studies suggest Omega might respond to a similar dynamic." The overhead lights in the observation room dimmed briefly as Titan's electromagnetic shield adjusted to a solar storm. In the momentary darkness, Omega's bioluminescent markings flared along its spine, a threat display that made Mara's skin prickle with instinctive fear. "I've reviewed the files of everyone who's attempted to establish contact," Mara continued. "They all approached from positions of dominance or force. Classic predator control methodology. It was never going to work with a creature of this intelligence level. And your approach? Mutual respect, gradual trust building, and the one thing no one's tried yet, vulnerability." Admiral Vargas shook her head. "The Security Council didn't approve suicide as a tactical option. Dr. Sinclair?" "It's not suicide," Mara insisted, though her pulse quickened at the thought of what she was proposing. "It's evolutionary psychology. Pack species protect their vulnerable members, especially those who contribute to group survival. I need to demonstrate value while showing that I trust Omega not to harm me. That's an enormous leap of faith." "Everything worthwhile usually is." The door to the observation room hissed open, and Security Major Rajesh Malhotra entered, his imposing frame filling the doorway. His expression darkened when he saw Mara. "Tell me the rumors aren't true," he said without preamble. "Tell me we're not betting Earth's survival on talking to monsters." Mara had expected resistance. The military establishment had been studying Omega as a weapon, not a potential ally. The shift in approach had ruffled feathers throughout the command structure. "The rumors are true, Major," Admiral Vargas confirmed before Mara could respond. "Dr. Sinclair has Security Council clearance for the Apex Armada initiative. You're here to facilitate, not obstruct." Malhotra's jaw tightened. "With respect, Admiral, I've seen what that creature can do. I was part of the containment team on Europa. It tore through assault mechs like they were made of paper. It understands our weapons, our tactics. It learns and adapts. And now we want to give it command of our last line of defense." "Not command," Mara corrected. "Leadership? There's a difference. Semantics won't matter when it turns our own fleet against us." Mara stepped forward. "Major, I've spent 3 years studying Omega's behavior patterns, communication signals, and social dynamics. The Vorkax aren't mindless killers. They're apex social predators with complex cultural systems. Yes, Omega is dangerous. Yes, it killed your comrades. But it was defending its territory against perceived invaders. You're anthropomorphizing a monster, Doctor. And you're demonizing a sentient being," she countered. "Neither approach serves our current crisis. The AI Armada is the immediate threat. If we can align Omega's interests with ours, we gain an advantage no algorithm can predict." Malhotra looked unconvinced, but Admiral Vargas raised a hand to forestall further argument. "The decision is made. Major, your security protocols have been updated. Dr. Sinclair requires access to Containment Level 6, effective immediately." His posture stiffened to attention. "Yes, Admiral." "And Major," Vargas added, her voice softening slightly. "I understand your concerns. That's why you'll be personally overseeing the security detail for this operation. If anything goes wrong, anything at all, you have authorization to terminate the experiment. And Omega." The unspoken implication hung in the air, and possibly Mara too, if necessary. Malhotra nodded grimly. "Understood, Admiral." After he left, Mara returned her attention to the creature in the containment chamber. Omega had resumed pacing, its powerful tail sweeping in measured arcs behind it. "He has good reason to be concerned," Vargas said quietly. "We all do." "I know." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. "But sometimes the greatest danger lies in not taking the risk." The Admiral studied her for a long moment. "You've staked your career on this theory, Dr. Sinclair. I hope you're right." "So do I," Mara replied. "For all our sakes." As Vargas departed, Mara remained at the window, watching Omega's methodical movements. In the reflected glass, she could see her own face determined, tired, afraid. 3 emotions she suspected Omega could understand perfectly well. "We're more alike than different, aren't we?" she murmured to the glass. "Both caught in circumstances beyond our control. Both fighting to survive." On the other side of the barrier, Omega paused mid-stride and lifted its head, as though it had heard her impossible whisper, all 6 eyes fixed on her position. Mara did not look away. The first step toward establishing pact bonds, she knew, was acknowledging each other's existence. The data lab was Mara's sanctuary. Walls of holographic displays showed behavioral analyses, neurological scans, and environmental monitoring from Omega's containment chamber. Dr. Lin Wei, the facility's AI integration specialist, was waiting for her when she arrived. "I heard the rumors," Lin said, rising from her workstation. "Are we really doing this?" "We are," Mara confirmed, activating her main console. "I need the complete historical interaction logs. Everything from first capture to now." Lin nodded, her fingers dancing across her own interface. Coming up. But Mara, have you considered that perhaps everyone before you failed to connect with Omega for good reason? Of course I have. The logs began populating Mara's display, hundreds of recorded attempts to communicate with, control, or coerce Omega over the years. All had ended in aggression, withdrawal, or both. But none of them approached it as a social integration problem. They were all trying to assert dominance. Isn't that how alpha predators establish hierarchy? Mara shook her head. That's an oversimplification that's plagued animal behavior studies for centuries. True alpha status isn't just about strength. It's about leadership, resource provision, conflict resolution, especially among pack predators like the Vorkax. Lynn looked unconvinced. Omega killed the last 3 behaviorists who entered its chamber. Because they entered as threats, Mara explained, highlighting footage of the most recent incident. Look at their posture, their equipment, protective gear, stun batons at the ready. To Omega, that reads as challenger behavior. She pulled up another file, the rarely viewed feeding protocols. Now watch this. The footage showed a remote feeding system delivering synthesized protein into Omega's chamber. The massive predator approached cautiously, then consumed the offering. Standard feeding response, Lynn shrugged. All captive animals eat. Watch its behavior after feeding, Mara insisted. Lynn leaned closer. On screen. Omega carried a portion of the food to the far corner of its enclosure, placing it precisely beneath a ventilation duct. Then, it retreated to the opposite side of the chamber. It's leaving food, Lynn asked, puzzled. It's making an offering, Mara corrected. In the wild, Vorkax bring portions of their kills back to the communal feeding grounds. This is pack behavior, attempting to engage with an absent pack. Omega has been trying to connect all along. Lynn's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're saying it's been trying to establish social bonds with its caretakers? Exactly. But every human interaction has reinforced its isolation instead. Mara's voice softened with empathy. We've been treating it as a specimen, when we should have been treating it as a displaced pack member. That's actually quite sad, Lynn admitted. It is. And it's why my approach has to be different. Mara pulled up her protocol design. I need to establish myself as a pack affiliate first, then gradually move toward matriarchal status. How do you even begin that process with a creature that could tear you apart in seconds? Mara smiled grimly. Very carefully. I'll need your help with the communication interface. Over the next several hours, they refined a system that would allow Mara to begin non-threatening interactions with Omega from a safe distance. Lynn's expertise in AI neural mapping provided valuable insights into how they might translate basic emotional states between species. By the time Major Malhotra arrived to escort Mara to her first official interaction session, they had constructed a rudimentary framework for building trust. Dr. Sinclair, Malhotra said stiffly from the doorway, the chamber is prepared according to your specifications, though I must register my formal protest at the reduced security measures. Noted, Major, Mara replied, gathering her tablet. But the barrier shield will remain in place for this initial contact. We're taking this one step at a time. Small comfort, he muttered. My team is on standby with tactical suppressors. As they walked through the facility's sterile corridors, Mara could feel the tension radiating from the security officer. You were on the Europa mission, she said quietly. You saw Omega in the wild. His pace faltered slightly. I saw what was left of my squad after it finished with them. I'm sorry. And she was. The reports from that encounter had been graphic in their detail. But you must have also observed how it operated its intelligence, its tactics. That's what concerns me most, Malhotra admitted. It didn't just kill. It hunted. It understood our formations, isolated the command officers first. It knew exactly what it was doing. Then You understand why we need it, Mara pressed. That same tactical intelligence, directed against the AI armada instead of us. They reached the specialized interaction chamber. Unlike the standard observation room, this one featured a transparent barrier that could be gradually adjusted in terms of both opacity and permeability. It would allow for incremental increases in proximity while maintaining safety. We've cleared all non-essential personnel from this section, Malhotra informed her. The emergency protocols are in place. If that thing shows any sign of aggression, it will, Mara interrupted calmly. Aggression displays are normal territorial responses. The key is distinguishing between display and intent. Malhotra looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. And if you're wrong about that distinction, she met his gaze steadily. Then you'll do your job, Major, and the Earth Alliance will need to find another approach to defeating the AI Armada. With that, she entered the interaction chamber and took her position at the adjustable barrier. On the other side, Omega's containment field had been extended to connect with this room, creating a controlled environment for their first meeting. Mara took a deep breath and activated the chamber systems. Introduce Subject Omega to interaction space, she instructed. A door slid open on the far side of the containment area. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate slowness, Omega emerged. In person, without the filter of observation screens, the creature's presence was overwhelming. Its iridescent scales shifted through shades of deep blue and violet as it moved, the bioluminescent patterns along its spine pulsing with a hypnotic rhythm. The primary arm's powerful appendages ending in dexterous, clawed hands were held slightly away from its body, in a posture that Mara recognized as cautious assessment rather than immediate threat. Omega stopped several meters from the barrier, all 6 eyes focused intently on Mara. Its sensory crests flared slightly, sampling the air. Mara remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing despite her racing heart. She knew Omega could sense fear would expect fear, but wouldn't necessarily respond to it with aggression if it wasn't accompanied by threatening movements. "Hello, Omega," she said softly. Her voice carried through the specialized acoustic system. "My name is Mara." The creature's head tilted slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that the behavioral logs had identified as attention focusing rather than aggression. Mara took this as an encouraging sign. Slowly, telegraphing her movements, she raised her empty hands, palms forward, a universal signal of peaceful intent among pack predators that relied on forelimbs for hunting. Omega's response was immediate and chilling. It lunged forward with explosive speed, stopping just short of the barrier, its massive head mere inches from where Mara stood. A thunderous vocalization, part roar, part complex harmonic, reverberated through the chamber as its forelimbs slammed against the transparent wall. Behind her, Mara could hear the security team's weapons powering up, but she raised a hand without looking back. "Hold position," she called out firmly. "This is expected behavior." Her heart hammered in her chest as she forced herself to remain still, maintaining eye contact with the creature that could end her life in seconds if the barrier failed. The display was terrifying, but Mara had studied enough pack behavior to recognize it as a dominance test rather than an attack meant to kill. After several tense moments, Omega ceased its aggressive display but remained close to the barrier, studying her with unnerving intensity. "I know," Mara said quietly. "I'm in your territory, but I'm not here to challenge you." She slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the floor, a deliberately vulnerable position that no predator would adopt if intending to attack. It was a calculated risk, but one that evolutionary psychology suggested might communicate her non-threatening intentions more effectively than words. Omega watched this display with obvious interest. Its primary eyes narrowed, and the secondary set scanned her systematically. Then, in a movement that caused audible gasps from the security team. It mirrored her action not precisely, given its different physiology, but it lowered its massive body to the floor in a clear approximation of her posture. Mara felt a surge of exhilaration. This simple mimicry was more response than anyone had achieved in years of attempts. "That's good," she said softly. "That's very good." For the remainder of that first session, Mara maintained her position, occasionally shifting slightly to observe Omega's reactions. The creature remained watchful, but made no further aggressive displays. By the time Mara signaled the end of the interaction, she had accumulated more behavioral data than the previous 6 months of observation had yielded. "It was testing your resolve," Major Malhotra commented as they reviewed the footage afterward. There was a new note in his voice, not quite respect, but perhaps a shade less skepticism. "Yes and no," Mara replied. "It was establishing baseline parameters for interaction. The aggression display was partly territorial, but also information gathering. Omega was watching my reaction to assess what kind of potential pack member I might be." "And what did it learn?" Mara allowed herself a small smile. "That I'm either very brave or very foolish. Both qualities that Vorkax respect, according to the hunting patterns we've observed." Admiral Vargas joined them, her expression guarded. "The Security Council wants daily progress reports. We're running out of time. Dr. Sinclair." "I understand." Mara pulled up her interaction plan on the main display. "Tomorrow, I introduce the feeding protocol. That's when we'll see if genuine bonding is possible." As the others filed out, Mara remained, studying the still image of Omega in its mirroring posture. There was something in that moment, a connection, however tenuous, that gave her hope. "Baby steps," she murmured to herself. "One small trust fall at a time." Over the next week, Mara established a routine. Each morning, she would enter the interaction chamber and sit at the barrier. Each session, she positioned herself slightly closer to the adjustable section of the wall, a small port that could be opened to pass items between the chambers. Omega, for its part, displayed remarkable adaptability. After the initial aggression display, it had shifted to watchful assessment, often mirroring Mara's movements with uncanny precision. By the 5th day, it would approach the barrier immediately upon her entrance, assuming a seated position without prompting. "The neurological scans are fascinating," Lynn told her, reviewing the data after a particularly productive session. "Omega's brain activity shows patterns consistent with social engagement rather than hunting behavior when you're present now. It's recognizing the interaction as a form of pack bonding," Mara confirmed. "Now, we need to move to the next phase, resource sharing." Major Malhotra, who had taken to observing the sessions personally, frowned at this. "You mean the feeding protocol through the barrier port?" "Yes, it's a critical step in establishing trust." "It's a critical vulnerability in our containment," he countered. "That port is the weakest point in the barrier system, which is precisely why it's meaningful," Mara explained patiently. "In pack dynamics, sharing food is a demonstration of trust and mutual dependence. If I'm willing to create a potential access point to offer sustenance, it communicates my intention to provide, rather than threaten. And if Omega decides to remove your arm instead of taking the food—" Mara met his gaze steadily. "Then, we'll have learned something important about the limitations of interspecies bonding, won't we?" The next morning, Mara arrived at the interaction chamber with a small container of synthesized protein, the same formula used in Omega's standard feeding protocols, but shaped into a form she could handle safely. As expected, Omega approached the barrier as soon as she entered, assuming its now customary seated position. Its eyes tracked the container in her hands with evident interest. "Today is different," Mara said softly, her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "Today we share." She moved slowly to the barrier port, a circular opening 50 centimeters in diameter that could be irised open to various widths. At her command, the port opened to its minimum aperture, just wide enough for her hand to pass through. Behind her, she could hear the security team shifting nervously, their weapons at ready. Malhotra had insisted on triple the normal complement of guards for this session. Omega watched with intense focus as Mara extended her hand through the opening, the protein cube resting on her palm. She held her position, arm fully extended into Omega's territory, making herself deliberately vulnerable. For several excruciating moments, the massive predator remained motionless, its 6 eyes fixed on her hand. Then, with a fluid grace that belied its enormous size, it moved forward. Mara fought every instinct screaming at her to withdraw as Omega's face came within inches of her exposed flesh. Its sensory crests flared, sampling her scent. She could feel the heat of its breath on her skin. With precision that spoke to its high intelligence, Omega delicately took the protein cube from her palm, its formidable teeth never grazing her skin. It retreated a short distance, consuming the offering with evident satisfaction. Mara slowly withdrew her hand. The port irising closed behind it. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Remarkable restraint," Malhotra murmured, the tension in his voice revealing how prepared he had been for disaster. But what happened next exceeded even Mara's optimistic projections. Omega moved to the far side of its chamber, where the remains of its morning feeding were still present. It selected a portion of choice cut by Vorkax standards and returned to the barrier. There, it placed the offering directly before the port and backed away slightly, its posture expectant. "It's returning the gesture," Lynn whispered through the comm system. "Reciprocal food sharing." Mara's throat tightened with emotion. This wasn't just mimicry. This was genuine social behavior. "Open the port," she instructed. "Dr. Sinclair," Malhotra began to protest. "Open the port," she repeated firmly. "This is the breakthrough we've been working toward." The aperture irised open once more. With deliberate movements, Mara reached through and took the offered food, bringing it back to her side. She didn't consume it, of course, but the symbolic acceptance was what mattered. Omega's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a steady, pulsing rhythm that previous studies had associated with social grooming behavior among Vorkax packs. "We've established initial pack bonding," Mara announced, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Omega has accepted me as a non-threatening entity with whom resources can be shared." The session continued with several more exchanges, each reinforcing the nascent bond. By the time Mara signaled the end of the interaction, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the observation team. "I've never seen anything like it," Admiral Vargas admitted when Mara presented her findings later that day. "But reciprocal feeding is still a long way from the kind of command integration we need for the Apex Armada concept." "It's the foundation," Mara insisted. "Now we build on it, systematically." Over the next 10 days, Mara gradually expanded the interactions. The barrier port was open to progressively larger diameters, allowing for more substantial exchanges. She introduced simple tactile contact, first just fingertips against Omega's sensory crests, then more prolonged touching. The creature's responses evolved from cautious acceptance to active engagement. It began initiating contact, presenting different parts of its anatomy for Mara's touch in what appeared to be a form of mutual grooming behavior. The neurological scans confirmed what Mara had theorized. Omega's brain activity during these sessions matched patterns observed in wild Vorkax during pack bonding rituals. "It's forming a genuine social attachment," she explained to the increasingly interested Security Council during their weekly briefing. "The fear response has been replaced by recognition and expectation." "But can it understand military objectives?" a council member asked skeptically. "Can it lead other apex predators against an AI armada?" "Vorkax are natural tacticians," Mara replied. Their hunting strategies involve complex coordination and adaptive problem-solving. Omega has already demonstrated advanced cognitive mapping of our facility and security protocols. With the right training framework, that intelligence can absolutely be directed toward military objectives. And how do you propose to create this framework, Dr. Sinclair? Admiral Vargas asked. Mara took a deep breath. The next phase requires me to enter Omega's chamber, full physical presence, without the barrier. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Major Malhotra's vehement objection. Absolutely not. It's tantamount to suicide. It's the only way to establish true pack hierarchy, Mara countered. Every successful interaction so far supports my theory that Omega is seeking social integration. But screen contact isn't enough for the deep bonding we need. You can't possibly guarantee your safety, another council member protested. No, I can't, Mara admitted. But I can point to substantial evidence supporting the risk. Omega has had multiple opportunities to harm me during our feeding exchanges, and has chosen not to. Its behavior consistently demonstrates curiosity and social interest rather than predatory intent. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, the desperation of their strategic situation tipped the scales. The AI Armada had already breached the outer defense perimeter of Jupiter's moons. Earth's conventional forces were falling back with heavy losses. They needed the Apex Armada operational, and quickly. With reluctant approval, Mara began preparations for direct contact. The chamber would be modified with emergency containment fields that could be activated in microseconds. Security teams would stand ready with the most powerful suppressant weapons in their arsenal. Every precaution would be taken. But ultimately, Mara would stand alone before the most dangerous apex predator ever encountered by humanity, with nothing but behavioral science and evolutionary psychology as her shields. The night before the scheduled direct contact, she found Major Malhotra waiting outside her quarters. "I've submitted my formal protest," he said without preamble, "and I've been overruled." "I'm sorry you feel that way," Mara replied, genuinely regretting the conflict her work had created. "But I believe this is necessary." "Then at least let me show you something." He handed her a data tablet. "Review the complete security footage from the Europa incident, not the sanitized version in the official report, the raw feed." Mara took the tablet, puzzled. "I've seen the reports." "The reports don't show everything." His expression was grim. "If you're determined to enter that chamber tomorrow, you should understand exactly what you're facing." Later, alone in her quarters, Mara reviewed the footage. The images were disturbing beyond what she had anticipated. The systematic way Omega had dismantled the Marine squad spoke to an intelligence that was not just predatory, but strategically vindictive. It had not simply killed. It had executed a precision assault that maximized terror before death. Yet, something else caught her attention, a pattern in the attacks that the reports had overlooked. Omega had targeted the most aggressive Marines first, those who had fired indiscriminately into the Vorkax nesting grounds. Those who had held defensive positions, protecting their comrades rather than advancing aggressively, had been killed last, almost as an afterthought. There was a moral calculus at work, primitive perhaps by human standards, but distinctly present. Omega hadn't just defended territory. It had punished perceived wrongdoing according to some internal ethical framework. This realization didn't make Mara less afraid of what awaited her tomorrow, but it did reinforce her conviction that meaningful communication was possible. If Omega could distinguish between different types of threats, it could potentially recognize genuine alliance. The morning of the direct contact arrived with a facility-wide tension that was almost palpable. The observation room was filled with security personnel and senior staff, all watching with barely concealed anxiety as Mara completed her preparations. "The emergency containment fields have been tested and confirmed operational," Malhotra informed her. his voice professionally detached, despite the concern evident in his eyes. Response time is under 0.3 seconds. Thank you. Major. Mara checked her simple attire. No protective gear. No weapons. Nothing that could be perceived as threatening. Just loose clothing that wouldn't restrict her movements if she needed to react quickly. The vital sign monitors are active, Lynn added, adjusting the small biosensor at Mara's wrist. We'll be tracking both you and Omega throughout the interaction. Admiral Vargas approached, her expression solemn. The Security Council is monitoring this session directly. Dr. Sinclair, there's a lot riding on your theory. I know. Mara met her gaze steadily. But, regardless of what happens in there today, we've already learned more about interspecies communication than we have in decades of conventional study. That knowledge won't be lost. It was perhaps a strange time to be thinking of her scientific legacy, but Mara found comfort in the idea that her work would continue, even if she did not. The final preparations completed, she stood before the entrance to Omega's chamber. The massive security door, 3 feet of reinforced composite materials, would open only long enough for her to enter, then seal behind her. Once inside, she would be entirely within Omega's domain, with only the emergency fields as protection. Ready when you are, Doctor, Malhotra said through the comm system. Mara took a deep breath, centering herself. Open the door! The massive portal slid aside with a hydraulic hiss. Beyond it lay Omega's chamber, a vast space designed to approximate aspects of its natural habitat, with varied terrain and environmental features that allowed it to express natural behaviors. Omega itself was nowhere to be seen. Mara stepped through the threshold, the door sealing behind her with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. She moved to the center of the open area, making herself visible from all angles of the enclosure. Omega, she called, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. It's Mara. A rustling sound came from a recessed area to her left, an artificial rock formation that mimicked the cave systems where Vorkax often made their dens. Slowly, deliberately, Omega emerged. Seeing the creature without any barrier between them was an entirely different experience. Its sheer physical presence was overwhelming the ripple of powerful muscles beneath iridescent scales, the subtle shifts of its sensory crests as it processed her scent on the open air, the low-frequency vibration that emanated from its massive form and resonated in Mara's chest cavity. Omega approached with measured steps, its 6 eyes fixed unblinkingly on her. Mara remained still, maintaining eye contact with the primary set while keeping her posture open and non-threatening. When it stopped, barely 2 meters away, Mara could feel the hot exhalation of its breath. This close, she could see the intricate patterns in its scales, the subtle movements of its secondary limbs, the intelligence burning in those alien eyes. I've come to join you, she said softly, to become part of your pack. Omega's head tilted slightly, a gesture she had come to recognize as consideration rather than aggression. Its sensory crests flared wider, taking in more information about her unshielded presence. Then, with a speed that defied its enormous size, it lunged forward. Mara heard shouting through her comlink, knew the emergency fields were moments from activation, but she raised her hand in a sharp gesture of negation. Hold, she commanded, her voice remarkably steady, given that Omega's massive head was now inches from her own, its breath hot on her face. This was the moment of truth, the test of everything she had theorized about Vorkax's behavior. If she was wrong, she would die here, now, torn apart by the very creature she had sought to understand. Time seemed to stretch as Omega held its position, neither retreating nor advancing further. Its primary eyes bored into hers with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. Then, with deliberate slowness, it lowered its head and emitted a complex harmonic vocalization different from the aggressive roars of previous encounters. This sound was lower, rhythmic, almost musical in its cadence. Mara recognized it from the behavioral archives, the greeting call that Vorkax Alphas used when welcoming subordinate pack members. It was an acknowledgement, not of submission, but of acceptance. With trembling fingers, she slowly raised her hand. Omega watched the movement but made no aggressive response. Gathering her courage, Mara placed her palm against the side of its massive head, feeling the warm, textured scales beneath her skin. The creature leaned slightly into the touch, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to the steady, pulsing rhythm she had come to associate with social bonding. "Connection established," she whispered, as much to herself as to the observers. "Initial pack integration successful." In the observation room, the tension broke in a wave of disbelieving murmurs. What they were witnessing defied everything known about Vorkax behavior. The most dangerous predator ever encountered was allowing a human to touch it, to stand within striking distance without attacking. Over the next hour, Mara carefully expanded the interaction, gradually moving around the chamber with Omega following, sometimes leading, sometimes responding to her cues. By the time she signaled for exit, they had established a rudimentary communication system based on posture, touch, and vocalization. "It's extraordinary," Admiral Vargas breathed when Mara returned to the observation room. "But can you build on this quickly enough to make a difference?" "The foundation is there," Mara confirmed, unable to keep the excitement from her voice despite her exhaustion. "Omega has accepted me as pack. Now we begin the real work establishing command pathways that can extend to the other Vorkax specimens." The news of Mara's breakthrough spread quickly through the facility. Over the following days, she spent increasingly longer periods in direct contact with Omega, gradually introducing elements of the military communication systems that would be necessary for the Apex Armada concept. To her delight, Omega proved remarkably adaptive, quickly grasping the symbolic language they developed to represent enemy positions, attack vectors, and defensive formations. Its tactical intelligence, freed from the constraints of captivity and given purposeful direction, flourished in ways that exceeded even Mara's optimistic projections. "It's not just learning our commands," she explained to the increasingly impressed Security Council. "It's improving upon them, offering variations that incorporate Vorkax hunting strategies." Major Malhotra, who had begun to thaw in his opposition, nodded thoughtfully. "The simulation results are undeniable. Omega's tactical variations consistently outperform our standard approaches against the AI prediction models. Because they're genuinely unpredictable," Mara emphasized. "The Vorkax evolved as apex ambush predators. Their hunting patterns incorporate elements of chaos theory that no algorithm can fully anticipate." The progress was encouraging, but time was running short. The AI Armada had breached Saturn's orbital defense grid and was advancing toward Titan itself. Within days, they would be within strike range of the research facility. "We need to accelerate the integration timeline," Admiral Vargas announced during an emergency briefing. "The 5 secondary Vorkax specimens must be brought into Omega's command structure immediately if the Apex Armada is to be deployed in time." Mara felt a flutter of anxiety. That's much sooner than planned. The pack bonding protocols for the secondary specimens were scheduled for gradual implementation over weeks, not days. "We don't have weeks, Dr. Sinclair," Vargas replied grimly. "We barely have days." And so began the most dangerous phase of the experiment, introducing Omega to the other captured Vorkax and establishing its dominance over them as Pack Alpha, with Mara as the guiding matriarch figure. The first such encounter was nearly catastrophic. The secondary Vorkax, a female designated Beta, reacted to Omega's presence with immediate aggression. What followed was a dominance display of such ferocity that the observation team was certain bloodshed was inevitable. Yet, Mara, standing calmly between the two massive predators, maintained her composure. Using the communication gestures she had established with Omega, she directed it to display dominance without lethal force. To everyone's amazement, Omega complied, subduing Beta with precision movements that demonstrated overwhelming power without causing serious injury. When the confrontation ended, Beta assumed a submissive posture, acknowledging both Omega's authority and, by extension, Mara's status. "The pack hierarchy is establishing itself naturally," Mara reported afterward. "But, with our guidance shaping the parameters." One by one, the remaining Vorkax specimens were integrated into the developing command structure. Each integration was tense. Each carried risks. But by the end of the accelerated timeline, all 5 secondary specimens had accepted Omega as their alpha and Mara as a figure of authority within their newly formed pack. "They're ready," she announced to Admiral Vargas, as they observed the assembled Vorkax moving through tactical drills with coordinated precision. "The Apex Armada can be deployed." Vargas nodded, her expression a mixture of awe and lingering concern. "The specialized transports are prepared. Each Vorkax will be assigned to a command vessel with direct neural interface to the fleet's tactical systems. Omega will serve as the central coordinator from the flagship." "And my role?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. "You'll be on the flagship with Omega. The bond you've established is the linchpin of this entire operation. If it fails..." Vargas left the consequence unspoken. The deployment proceeded with remarkable efficiency, considering the unprecedented nature of the operation. Each Vorkax was secured aboard its designated vessel, connected to the tactical systems through interfaces designed by Dr. Linway's team. Aboard the flagship renamed Apex Prime, for the mission Mara accompanied Omega to the specially designed command center. The massive Predator moved with surprising grace through the adapted corridors, its intelligent eyes taking in every detail of its new environment. "This is where we make our stand," Mara told it as they entered the command center. "Our pack against the machines." Omega's response was a low, resonant vocalization that the translation systems interpreted as acknowledgement and readiness. As the fleet prepared to engage the advancing AI Armada, Mara found Major Malhotra waiting near the tactical station, his expression solemn. "I owe you an apology, Dr. Sinclair," he said quietly. "I was certain your approach would fail, that Omega would revert to its predatory nature the moment opportunity arose." "The apology isn't necessary, Major," Mara replied. "Your skepticism was well-founded, based on previous experience. Science advances through rigorous questioning, not blind acceptance." He nodded, then gestured toward where Omega had positioned itself at the center of the command platform. "What you've accomplished is remarkable, but I have to ask, do you trust it truly? When the battle begins, and the chaos of combat surrounds us." Mara considered the question carefully. "Trust is perhaps the wrong framework," she finally said. "What I've established with Omega isn't based on human concepts of trust or loyalty. It's rooted in something more primal: pack survival. Omega recognizes that our survival and its survival are now inextricably linked. And if that calculation changes..." She met his gaze steadily. "Then we adapt, as all successful species must." The battle alert sounded before he could respond. The AI Armada had been detected on an intercept course with the Apex fleet. "All stations, battle readiness," Admiral Vargas commanded from the primary tactical position. "Dr. Sinclair, prepare Omega for engagement." Mara moved to the specialized interface platform where Omega waited. The neural links activated, connecting the massive Predator to the fleet's tactical systems and, through them, to the other Vorkax commanders. "Show them what you can do," Mara said softly, placing her hand briefly on Omega's flank in what had become their signal for mutual trust. The battle that followed would later be studied in military academies throughout human space as a revolution in tactical warfare. The Apex Armada, led by Omega's unpredictable hunting strategies, shattered the AI Armada's algorithmic defenses. Where conventional forces had been systematically countered and destroyed, the Vorkax-led assault created patterns of such beautiful chaos that the enemy's predictive systems failed catastrophically. Attack vectors shifted mid-trajectory. Defensive formations dissolved and reformed in configurations that defied standard analysis, and coordinated strikes emerged from seemingly random movements. At the heart of it all was Omega, its massive form illuminated by the tactical displays, its 6 eyes tracking the battle with predatory focus. Through the neural interface, it directed not just its own vessel, but coordinated the movements of the entire Apex fleet, incorporating the unique hunting styles of each Vorkax commander into a unified strategy. "It's working," Admiral Vargas breathed, as the enemy formations began to disintegrate under the assault. "They can't adapt to the Vorkax attack patterns." For hours, the battle raged across the void of space surrounding Titan. The AI Armada, for the first time since its emergence, found itself outmaneuvered and outthought. What had begun as a desperate gamble was becoming a decisive victory. Then, as the enemy forces attempted a final, concentrated assault on the Apex Prime, disaster struck. A direct hit to the flagship's propulsion systems sent cascading failures through the ship's infrastructure. The command center shook violently, consoles exploding in showers of sparks as power surged through damaged circuits. Mara was thrown from her position near Omega, striking her head against a fallen support beam. Through blurred vision, she saw emergency containment fields failing throughout the chamber, including those surrounding Omega's interface platform. The massive predator was suddenly unrestrained in the midst of chaos and destruction. Exactly the conditions that might trigger a reversion to pure predatory instinct. Several crew members, seeing Omega free amid the destruction, reached for weapons in panicked response. Major Malhotra's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold fire! Hold your positions!" Mara struggled to her feet, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Through the smoke and emergency lighting, she could see Omega moving not toward the exits or in random destruction, but purposefully toward her. "It's all right," she called out, raising her hand to forestall any defensive action. "Omega isn't attacking, it's responding to the threat to the pack." And indeed, as the massive predator reached her, its behavior was not aggressive, but protective. It positioned its armored body between Mara and the most severe structural damage, creating a living shield against potential debris. More remarkably, it began assisting wounded crew members, using its powerful limbs to lift fallen equipment and clear paths to emergency exits. The behavior was unambiguous. Omega was protecting what it now considered its pack. "Continue battle operations," Admiral Vargas ordered, her voice steady despite the destruction around them. "Reroute command functions to secondary systems. Dr. Sinclair, can Omega maintain tactical coordination?" Mara looked up at the massive predator that had positioned itself protectively beside her. "Omega," she said clearly. "The hunt continues. Our pack needs your guidance." The creature's response was immediate, a shift in posture and a focused intensity that signaled its understanding. It moved with Mara to the backup tactical station, resuming its connection to the fleet's command systems without hesitation. The battle resumed, and despite the damage to the flagship, the Apex Armada pressed its advantage. Within hours, the remaining enemy forces were in full retreat, their algorithmic cohesion shattered by the unpredictable genius of Vorkax hunting strategies. As the all-clear signals finally echoed through the damaged command center, Admiral Vargas approached where Mara stood beside Omega, her hand resting lightly on the creature's massive flank. "The Security Council has been monitoring the engagement," Vargas said, her voice filled with something approaching awe. "They've witnessed not just the tactical success, but Omega's protective behavior during the crisis. They're reconsidering many of their assumptions about interspecies cooperation. Mara nodded, fatigue and elation mingling as the adrenaline of battle faded. The Vorkax aren't just weapons to be pointed at an enemy. They're intelligent beings with complex social structures that can incorporate us if we approach them correctly. The Council is already discussing expanded applications, Vargas continued. A permanent Apex command structure with Vorkax integration throughout our defense forces. A multi-species leadership model, Mara mused, stroking Omega's scales thoughtfully. It has potential beyond military applications. The same principles could transform our approach to all sentient species encounters. Major Malhotra joined them, his uniform torn and stained, but his bearing as formal as ever. They're calling for a formal designation, he informed them. The Council wants Omega recognized with official rank and status in the fleet hierarchy. Mara laughed softly. Admiral Omega, I'm not sure our rank structures translate well to Vorkax social systems. They're suggesting Grand Admiral of the Apex Forces, Malhotra replied, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. Apparently saving Earth Alliance merits a unique title. As the recovery operations began around them, Mara remained beside Omega, the bond between them transcending the conventional boundaries of researcher and subject. Together, they had forged something unprecedented, a genuine alliance between species that evolution had shaped into perfect predators. In the days that followed, as the Apex Armada pursued the retreating AI forces back beyond Jupiter's orbit, securing the outer colonies once more, Mara continued to refine the communication protocols with Omega and the other Vorkax commanders. The success of their initial engagement had opened doors that once seemed permanently closed. What you've accomplished changes everything, Admiral Vargas told her during the formal commendation ceremony held aboard the repaired Apex Prime. Not just for this conflict, but for our understanding of intelligence itself. Mara accepted the commendation with characteristic modesty, but her thoughts were already turning to the broader implications of their breakthrough. This is just the beginning, she replied. Omega and the Vorkax have shown us that cooperation can transcend evolutionary differences when we approach each other with respect rather than fear. The ceremony concluded with an unprecedented moment Omega, adorned with specially designed insignia, marking its new status. Standing beside Mara as Admiral Vargas formally announced the permanent establishment of the Apex Command Division within Earth Alliance forces. As the assembled officers and dignitaries applauded, Mara felt Omega shift slightly beside her, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing in what she had come to recognize as contentment. She placed her hand on its massive flank, feeling the powerful muscles relaxed beneath her touch. "We did it," she murmured, too softly for anyone but Omega to hear. "We found a better way forward together." The creature's response was a low, harmonious vocalization that needed no translation. In the complex social language of the Vorkax, it was the sound of belonging, of pack, of home, of future. And as Earth Alliance began to rebuild, strengthened by its unprecedented new allies, that future seemed brighter than anyone could have imagined when Mara first stood before the most dangerous predator alive and offered not domination, but understanding. The Apex Armada, led by a creature once feared as a monster, now stood as the vanguard of a new approach to the challenges of a dangerous universe, one where different species might find common cause, not despite their differences, but because of the unique strengths those differences provided. It was, Mara reflected as she walked beside Omega through the corridors of what was now their shared command. Perhaps the most important lesson any species could learn, that true strength comes not from conquering differences, but from embracing them. In the vastness of space, as the fleet prepared for its next mission, that lesson would guide them into whatever challenges awaited a human scientist and an apex predator, leading the way together.